here is a question that really opens up a tremendous subject, and the answer to it will clarify many questions that are in your thought, some of you. The first part of the question is, would you please discuss integrity in this respect? And can one become actively engaged in this ministry, such as in the role of practitioner, while still in bondage to cigarettes or some other habitual form of materiality, such as this one? You see, here's the key in the question: still in bondage. Now, what does that indicate to you? An individual still in bondage. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Then this indicates, if one is in bondage, that the Spirit of the Lord isn't there. Now, how could one succeed in a spiritual ministry, in a healing ministry, a spiritual healing ministry, if there weren't present the presence of the Lord? If the presence of the Lord were there, there would be no bondage. In the presence of God, there is fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment. What is the function of the Christ? Study the New Testament, the four Gospels, and you will discover that the gospel, the function of the Christ is to set us free. Free of disease, free of sin, free of false appetite, free of lack. Do you not see that it would be impossible to succeed in a spiritual ministry without the presence of God? And with the presence of God, there would be no bondage. You see, that is the meaning of integrity used in a spiritual sense. Either you have the consciousness of the presence of God, or you haven't. If you haven't, it's not a disgrace. That is the normal, natural state of the natural man. That is the natural state of the human race, to be without the presence of God. That is why we have wars. That is why we have gambling casinos. That is why we have liquor. Because there is an absence of God. None of these things could exist in the presence of God. And so it is that to undertake this work or any phase of a spiritual ministry without having attained some measure of Christ consciousness would be a blunder, because it would result in failure. It is literally true, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. No one succeeds in a spiritual ministry by virtue of his knowledge, or how many times he has read the Bible, or how many Bible stories or quotations he can spout. A spiritual ministry is not founded on the wisdom of a man or a woman. It is not even founded on their human virtues. It is possible to be obedient to all of the 10 Commandments and have no success whatsoever in the spiritual ministry. Because it isn't a matter of obeying the Ten Commandments, it is a matter of being touched by the Spirit and being freed of materialistic bonds. There are many materialistic bonds, but a spiritual ministry can be conducted only when these bonds have been broken. When we are spiritually free, well, yes, here's the reason. The term spiritual consciousness means consciousness of spirit, consciousness of spirituality, consciousness of spiritual life, spiritual law, spiritual being. Well, now, a human being cannot be conscious of those things. You have to rise into a higher dimension of consciousness, above mortal consciousness, above material consciousness, above human consciousness, into the divine. Even to attain, let us say, freedom from smoking or drinking doesn't constitute a qualification for the spiritual ministry. One has to rise or be above even good humanhood. There must be a transcendental something, a transcendental presence, a transcendental gift, and it has a name so that no one can miss it. When we speak of ourselves as men and women, and we say, I, Joel, I, Bill, I, Mary, we are talking about an individual who is made up partly of good, partly of not so good. The human has elements of patience and impatience, truth and lies, love and disinterest, selfish love and part unselfish love. But those are not the qualities of a spiritual ministry. And an individual, regardless of how good, does not conduct a spiritual ministry. The spiritual ministry is the function and the activity of the Christ. When the Christ has entered into the soul of an individual, the world is new. When Christ enters into the soul, the old man dies. There is a rebirth. And this rebirth isn't a good human being. Oh no, that is not the ministry. It is this other I, or Christ. Now note the difference. When Jesus is talking of Jesus, he says, I can of my own self do nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. My message is not mine, but his that sent me. But when he ascends in consciousness, and when he is addressing his disciples, and probably some of the more enlightened students, He says, knowest thou not? Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the bread, the meat, the wine, and the water. I am life eternal. I am the resurrection. Please be assured this is not a Hebrew rabbi talking. This is the Christ uttering itself through the lips of this Hebrew rabbi. When a healing ministry is conducted, when spiritual healing actually takes place, when through a teacher a student is lifted in consciousness to the realization of truth, not just the acquisition of it in books, but the realization of it as happens in meditation, it wasn't the humanhood of the practitioner or the teacher that did that. It was the Christ. And nothing less than the Christ will do it. But if an individual has attained the Christ, he is not smoking, he is not drinking, he is not addicted to or in bondage to materiality. Oh, it doesn't mean that if the occasion requires that he won't take a glass of wine. It doesn't mean that if the occasion is present he might not dance a dance one evening. It doesn't mean that they don't go to theaters or enjoy music. It only means that they are not in bondage to these. There is no dependence on tobacco, on alcohol, on outside amusements, or even on human companionship. Those that enter this ministry may have lots of human companions. They may have beautiful families. They may have a wonderful companionship among their students and disciples, but they're not dependent on it. Oh no. They're ready at any moment to spend the day, the week, the month, or the year entirely alone and not miss anybody, because they are in the companionship of the Christ that is conducting the ministry. It is for this reason that in our work we really not only caution students but beg and plead with them not to go into this work until they have been touched by the Spirit. And how may they know when they have been touched by the Spirit? When they have discovered that they are free from bondage, when no longer are they in slavery to the material senses, when they have reached the place where they no longer are worried about finances, even if they haven't got them. It isn't necessary to be rich or to be well off to be in this ministry. It is only necessary to have no concern for supply, knowing that the Christ is its own supply, the source of bread, meat, wine, and water. But if one hasn't attained that realization of freedom, how then can they feed the multitudes and have 12 baskets full left over? How can they have the strength to carry on a spiritual ministry which requires very often 20 and sometimes 24 hours a day and night? No, to conduct a spiritual ministry, or to speak of integrity in this sense, means to continue to be a student, continue to study, continue to meditate, until the activity of the Christ has been realized with signs following. A consciousness has been attained that leaves one in the realization of their freedom. In their freedom, they can free others. Those who are bound can hardly set someone else free. Oh, it doesn't mean that if a practitioner or teacher for some reason has a cold today that they can't heal 100 colds, because they're never in bondage to that cold. It's just some kind of a temporary mesmerism. They're not in bondage to it. So it is. Every individual knows when they can truthfully say within themselves, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. I am ordained into the spiritual ministry. And then, being patient, and you remember Saul of Tarsus, after his illumination, waited 9 years before he went out into the ministry. 9 years to receive that inner assurance that he had been instructed, that he'd been taught, that he knew that his supply would be before him at every step of the way, that his protection would be beside him every step of the way, even though he went out into a world of persecution, a world of spiritual ignorance. Knowing the trials he would meet, he also knew the divine protection that he had. I have heard it said that be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, means to have limitless love, even as God. Yes, but what do we mean by have limitless love? That raises a question. What is limitless love? Who has limitless love? How do you know if you have limitless love? And this raises a very serious question. To answer this, I must go back to the beginning of my own healing ministry. I was reading in all of the literature that word love, divine love. Love. You must love one another. You must love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul. You must love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, the literature was filled with that word love. And the reason that this, yes, I can say annoyed me, was because I couldn't understand it. I didn't feel love. I had no feeling of love and didn't know what it meant. I had no realization of that. Now, what do you mean by love? And what does all this mean by love? But I had 3 wonderful friends, all practitioners. And one night we were all together, as we occasionally were, and I asked that question, firstly because 2 of them were the very personification of love. They were both mothers, good mothers, and women of whom you could truthfully say they are very loving. And I asked them that question, what is love? What is this love that I'm reading about in the books? How do you love the Lord thy God? How do you love your neighbor as yourself when you don't feel any love? Well, they looked at me as if I just lost my mind. Why, Joel, when we talk of you, we always speak of you as one of the most loving people we know. Me? Oh, don't ever say anything like that, because I must be truthful with you. I don't even feel anything like love. I have no sense of what it means. And truthfully, I don't love anybody. And I don't seem to love anything. Well, you know, for a long while they wouldn't believe me. Eventually they came to know that that was true. Now, as long as I was in that work, people did think of me and speak of me and even tell me to my face how very loving I was. Why? Well, because I would sit up all night if necessary to heal somebody, or I would go to any length to visit them, or go to a hospital if there was a need, do anything that was necessary in the ministry. And for that they called me loving. I'm going to tell you the truth. I had no sense of being loving or loving anybody, and I didn't do it because I loved anybody. I did it for only one reason. If we are going to devote our lives to spiritual healing, we first of all should know what the principles are that are involved, and then we should put them into practice with every opportunity that's given to us. That's why we're in the work. And so when I undertake to work with someone or take a case, it isn't because I love them, it isn't because I love mankind, it is because I have discovered a principle, and that's my job to show it through, to bring it through, to prove it. Not only for the world, but for me. How can I live with myself if I'm not proving the principle of the work that I'm in? Well, it so happens that that's what they call love. All right, as far as I'm concerned, the only love that's involved is the love of this principle, the love of this work, and wanting, if it is a principle, to see that the whole world gets it. And with every healing, we are proving to the world the unreality of disease, that it is not necessary to die of disease. One time, in Los Angeles, I was called to a very, very elderly woman who was given up, and the family sent for my help, and the woman was restored. And somebody in that family knew a man who is well known internationally as a religious leader, and told him about this wonderful healing in their family. Some months or years later, when this man and I met, he said, "I wonder why you did that healing. At her age, she's only going to live a short while longer anyhow, and what is she going to do with her life between now and then? Knit booties for her grandchildren?" In other words, she's not going to contribute anything spiritually to life, or even humanly contribute a great deal. So what difference does it make if she passes on at 89 or 90, or 89 and a half, or 92 and a half? And my answer was this: I didn't know that lady, and so I had no interest in her whatsoever. My interest was that God is life eternal, and my function is to demonstrate it on earth. Prove it if it can be proven, and that's the reason I did it. It wasn't for love of her or her family. It was for the principle's sake, and she got the benefit of it. But it wasn't only she that got the benefit of it. Doctors knew what had happened. The family knew what had happened, and in some way or other, a greater interest in spiritual healing was awakened. So it is that I ask you this question: what is limitless love? According to the Master, it is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. Each one has to put their own interpretation on that. Now, there is a point that I have seen for years and years, and it's a major part of the Infinite Way teaching, that since we are infinite, since the allness of God constitutes the allness of individual man, there is nothing that can be added to us. And if we lack anything, it is because we are not expressing it, not because either God or man is withholding it from us. I use always the illustration of that poor widow who was asked, "What have you in your house?" Today I read this passage in a book, that if you want the wealth of the Indies, you must carry the wealth of the Indies to the Indies. This, in short, sums up the whole secret of supply. Whatever it is that you want, express it. It's already within you. Don't believe that you are going to go somewhere and find supply. Don't believe you're going to go somewhere and find love. You're not. You're going to carry it there, or you're not going to find it. In one of our letters recently, I commented on the fact that I received so many letters from people wanting help for companionship. Well, I always write them, I can't do that because I don't believe you want companionship. I think you're looking for a companion. And that's something quite different. Anybody that's looking for companionship can have it on 5 minutes' notice. All they have to do is be a companion, and they have companionship. Be a companion. Start out with, what have you in the house? Well, I have companionship. Good. Well, go out in the garden and express that to the flowers or the bees or the birds. Go down to the ocean and express companionship to the fish, or out with a squirrel somewhere. But express companionship. Get it out of your system, and before 24 hours rolls around, you'll find somebody sharing companionship with you. But to make a vacuum of yourself and sit back here and say, I want companionship, and now wait for somebody to come and bring it to you, there is no such thing. There's no such possibility. You are offering nothing. You're merely seeking to get. And everybody has a mental wall up against those who are seeking to get. Everybody knows intuitively when there's a parasite outside looking to clutch on. Therefore, if we really want companionship, if we really want love, we have to find some way of expressing it. And this is the secret of supply, monetary supply. There is no way to spiritually demonstrate supply except in the degree of one's giving. It'll never come through getting, because you're just setting up a vacuum and expecting somebody to come along and fill it for no good reason. But the moment that we begin to open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape, the very moment we begin to share, cooperate, give, bestow, that outpouring is that which returns to us. The bread that we cast upon the water is the bread that comes back to us. Therefore, again answering this, of course there's no way to be perfect except through love, but there is no way to love through the emotions, except human love. I'm talking now divine love. There is no way to express love through desire. Love is only expressed in putting out into circulation something that we have, whether that is clothing, money, or the ability to pray. As long as we expend it, it returns to us. And so the lesson that I've learned since those early days is this: the reason we miss the meaning of love is that we've been taught to think of it as an emotion, or we've been taught to think of it as doing good to somebody. And that may be true on the human level. It isn't true on the spiritual level. On the spiritual level, it just means an outpouring of whatever it is that one has stored up in consciousness, and the willingness to share it. And I don't know that anyone feels any emotion about that. Certainly I don't. It's a way of life. It's like the fruit tree's giving up its fruit. I don't think the fruit tree has any emotion about it, or any feeling that, oh, I'm doing you people a great favor, I'm feeding you. No, the function of a fruit tree is to give up its fruit. The function of a flower bush is to give up its flowers, and our function is merely to let God express itself through us in whatever way our nature attests to. And this about error is but a symbol denoting lack of recognition of God and so forth. Of course, error isn't a thing any more than darkness is a thing. There's no such thing as darkness. There's no entity. It's an absence of light. And error is an absence of truth, of the understanding of God. But more especially, error, and this goes back to the first question, error is our lack of Christ attainment or Christ experience. Where the experience of the Christ is or has taken place, there is no error, not in the sense of any evil, destruction. As long as we tabernacle in the flesh, there'll be minor problems of one nature or another, because we're not living unto ourselves, we're living unto each other, and to some extent we bear each other's burdens. But on the whole, an individual who is touched or who has had the experience of the Christ isn't experiencing error. And so we might say that all that error is, all that sin is, false appetite, disease, lack, is just the degree in which we have not yet attained the activity or the experience of the Christ. And again I say, this is no disgrace. This is the natural state of the natural man, and it only means that we must continue to be students, go deeper, 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 until the experience takes place. And then we find that the exterminator of darkness is that light. We find that the exterminator of error from our experience is that Christ experience, that Christ attainment. The absence of Christ attainment accounts for every bit of discord in our lives, except the discord, of course, that we take upon ourselves because we insist on living our lives with our families who may not yet have attained, and so we take over some of their problems. And there is no excuse for avoiding that either. That is part of our function, to take it over, even if it does involve some measure of problem for ourselves. But where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And when there is bondage, be assured of this, the Spirit of the Lord is momentarily absent. This keeps coming in, and I keep pushing it out, recognizing that I'm not an authority. Could you speak to us briefly about teenagers? It does seem to be a very prevalent problem. Now it says here, I'd rather consider them as God age. Not some that I read about in the paper, I hope. One of the mistakes of metaphysics is that it looks at a sick or dying person and says, oh, you're a spiritual idea. Or it walks up and down the street hungry and says, I am rich and I know it. The mistake is that we're calling that natural man, the man who is not under the law of God, neither indeed can be, we're calling him spiritual. The first thing that we have to recognize is this. When we behold error in any form, we don't want to call it spiritual. If it was spiritual, it wouldn't be error. If it was spiritual, we wouldn't be trying to change it. So all we're doing is lying to ourselves and hoping that that affirmation is going to change the evil to good. Now, let us see this in its right light. If we really were to look on the teenagers, and more especially those that are acting like modern teenagers, not as images of God or God age, if we could look on them and realize this is the carnal mind, this appearance, this is the carnal mind. And because it is not of God, it has no existence. Then you'd find you were handling it and changing it. You don't get anywhere calling a sinner a saint. You don't get anywhere calling a mortal an immortal. But if you are able to look out at an erroneous picture, any erroneous picture, and realize, this is the carnal mind, this is the arm of flesh, this is an illusory appearance without ordination, without God or authority, that mask would drop away and the God age would now appear. The spiritual identity hid behind that mask. But if you call that mask spiritual, you cannot make your demonstration of harmony. If you look at any form of evil, whether person, place, or thing, and call it spiritual, you will not succeed. But if you will look at the evil appearance and realize that this appearance is not of God, it is the illusory sense or belief in two powers, you will soon see the appearance go, and then that divinity that is hid behind the mask will show through. Now, you know, you've read it enough in metaphysics that the word personality really means mask. A person's personality is the mask they are hiding behind. They have a go-getter personality, which isn't their true nature. They have an overly ambitious personality, and it isn't their true nature. They have a pushing forward, impertinent personality, and it isn't their true nature. Or they're sweet as saccharin, and that isn't their true nature. In other words, the personality that we present to the world is the mask we are hiding behind. And none of us are like the picture we present to the world. Every one of us is hiding inside and hoping that the world can't see us as we are. We're so good and perfect, we'd be ashamed to show ourselves. And so we hold up this image of a strong personality or a clinging personality, so forth and so on. We aren't that way inside, because inside we are the very child of God. When you then see what is now popularly called teenagers, don't call them spiritual. Try to understand that that's a mask. And don't ever forget this, that these teenagers we're talking about that act so badly, whose conduct is so bad, don't ever forget they are not bad. That is a defense mechanism with them. They're confused in this age, very confused. They know that our generation has gotten them in enough financial trouble that if they could become rich, they couldn't pay off the debts of this nation. They know right well that they're never going to get rich at the rate the income tax is, unless they're awfully lucky and find an oil well somewhere. They know that as they come up out of high school that they're not going to have a chance to settle down into courtship and marriage, because you remember that old cartoon of Gibson's? Uncle Sam wants you. They know that. They know that Uncle Sam is standing with a uniform in his hand behind every boy. And so they know that they're not going to come out of high school and enjoy the normal friendships and associations of their high school mates, that they're going to be yanked into uniform. By the time they get back, they probably need some extra education, or they'll have to wait a few years fooling around with jobs not commensurate with their standing. They are a disrupted generation. And how are they going to show that except by this bravado, except by this pretense at being wild? They're not that way at all, because they aren't any different than we were at their age. Only we didn't have occasion to act that way outwardly, except those, yes, we had a similar period in the 1920s, the jazz age, you remember that? All of the youth were going to the devil. Well, you and I were the youth. We were that youth going to the devil. Tea parties, cocktail parties, afternoon dances. Oh, you see, it's only been a temporary hurt, and we've all gotten over it and become parents or grandparents and pretty near great-grandparents, some of us. So try to see that what these people are showing to us is a mask, hiding their real, true, sweet natures. But don't call it spiritual. Recognize it as a mask and say, I know thee who thou art. The arm of flesh, nothingness, a pretense. And then watch that mask drop away and the real nature of the child come through. But it really is being a little bit foolish to call them spiritual while they're acting like devils. It's in the same way that some of us Well, I didn't go through that stage, but I've seen enough others in metaphysics go through the stage when if they got a cold, they stayed home and they hid it so nobody would know their lack of demonstration. I never had that feeling because what I am, I am. Whatever degree of awareness I'm showing through, I'm showing through. If it's not up to perfection, well, I haven't claimed to have attained perfection. And so if there is a claim at the moment, let me acknowledge it. It's a claim. It's not of God. It isn't going to last. It isn't going to do anything. It's an appearance. And then we're free. We had the experience last year in New Zealand, arriving in Wellington, and a delegation of students whom we had never met before coming to meet us. And I got off the plane without a voice. Just happened 15 minutes before we got off the plane. My voice is gone. I can't even whisper. And here are the students looking for their great spiritual teacher. And all he can do is this, point to Emma. Well, there's no use of hiding it. No use of hiding it. You know, I could have had Emma say, well, he's in retreat, you know, he's and I'd have been an even greater spiritual teacher then. But isn't that foolish? Isn't that foolish? I had a claim. And it hit me that way, and it's no wonder when you keep talking 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, tonsils have to give out sometime. And they did. But that night I was on the platform, and the voice operated perfectly. The minute I got off the platform, it wouldn't work anymore. It went on for several days. And I suppose they thought, well, this is a fine, how do you do? That's happened. I've had it in London. I've had to go on the platform with a handkerchief. All right, let's confess right now. I haven't ascended. But isn't it wonderful to know that we have found a principle whereby we're virtually not in bondage to anything, and if we are for a few moments, it doesn't last. We have found the secret of life. And if for one reason or another some of these minor things bother us, let's not deny it. Let's be grateful that we have something with which to meet it. And so it is. I try with our groups to know what we're going through with a claim of communism, claim of New Dealism still hanging over the world, claim of teenagers, juvenile delinquency. I know that those things are abroad in the world, but I try with our students, and I caution our students in their work to handle them as appearances, as universal belief in two powers, as part of the breaking up process of encrusted evil, and in this way to get behind the mask and behold that divinity that's hidden inside. We can open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape, even of these people who believe they have such great material powers. We really can rob them of their powers just by silently and secretly abiding in the realization that temporal power is the arm of flesh or nothingness. Just going back to that great wisdom of the Hebrew prophet, who could see that no matter how great the enemy armies was, the armies of the aliens, that they have only the arm of flesh, temporal power. There is still God. And every time any one of us is thinking about one of these world problems, anywhere from communism down to teenagers, and just realize they have only the arm of flesh, or temporal power. And temporal power in the presence of God is no power. Sometimes when I'm working with students, individually I mean, students that are on their way up out of the personal sense of life, I give them assignments. And one of these students, I recently gave the assignment of looking up in my writings and meditating on the subject of spiritual power, because spiritual power is the secret of our entire lives. If you ever discover the nature of spiritual power, you'll be free of all bondage. It's the one and only thing there is to know, is the nature of spiritual power. All else fades into insignificance besides that. And today I received this manuscript on the subject of spiritual power, and I would like to read it to you, because the student has done a good job, and it follows out just what we have been discussing here tonight. Spiritual power is the activity of God's presence. Spiritual power, then, is the very presence of God and must partake of the nature of God. In trying to understand the nature of spiritual power, we begin by taking into meditation our thoughts on the nature of God. In John we read, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. One of the definitions of worship is to honor. We can only honor God, who is spirit, by our spiritual discernment, our spiritual awareness. Spirit knows no confines. Spirit is infinite. We look at our material bodies and the things of the material universe which surround us. Obviously they are not spirit. Where then is spirit to be found? And again we read in John, no man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. Hereby know we that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he hath given us of his Spirit. Our real identity, then, can only be discerned spiritually. In the material universe, as well as in the spiritual, power is invisible. It is never seen. Only the effects of power can be seen. Some powers, like electricity, are so mysterious that they cannot be explained satisfactorily. We know how they work, however, and how to use them. In the old days of metaphysics, we used mental power, or what we thought was spiritual power, to achieve demonstrations. In the infinite way, we are taught an entirely new concept of spiritual power. We find that it is all power, which is really none power, and which cannot be used because it is not a power over anything. In our meditations, in trying to understand the nature of spiritual power, we always begin by pondering the allness and onlyness of God. In Romans we read, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Could anything be plainer than that? But the human mind has been educated in fear, And to the human mind, the powers that be are very far from being ordained of God. Rather are they a belief in other powers to be feared and resisted. We are told quite plainly the results of this resistance to God's ordinance of no power but of God. And I'll interrupt this there to remind you how on almost every page you will read that God is not a power, God is not to be used, God is not a power over evil, God is not a power over sin or over disease. God is infinite. Actually, God's power cannot be resisted or interfered with. However, we can, in effect, cut ourselves off in belief from God's power by believing in other powers. This is the only way in which we can resist the power of God. Many times each day we are tempted to believe in other powers, the power of sin, of disease, of poverty, of distress, of death. Through our studies as Infinite Way students, there is born in us gradually a spiritual poise, born of the discipline we are called on to practice when faced with these beliefs in other powers. The psalmist said, God hath spoken once, twice have I heard this, that power belongeth unto God. If power belongs unto God, it must partake of the nature of God, and so our meditation brings our thoughts back again to the nature of God. And I interrupted again. If power is of God, what thoughts must go through your mind when you think of Mr. K or juvenile delinquency or other injustices of the world? What must be in your consciousness when these pictures are presented to you and you return in thought to the statement, power is of God? Not power is of man, not power is of thing, not power is of bombs, power is of God. And with that you are nullifying this belief in two powers. Now I return to the manuscript. The words of Paul to the Hebrews come to mind. For the word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of the soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And yet there must have been a reservation in his mind, for while he agreed that the carnal mind is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be, still he made of it a power as an enmity against God. In the Infinite Way teachings we learn that here he made a grave mistake, for in the entire kingdom of God there is no enmity against God. God is supreme unto infinity. How to understand this? The words of the psalmist come to mind. O send out thy light and thy truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me unto thy holy hill and to thy tabernacles. Only in the sanctuary of tabernacling with God can we catch a glimpse of the allness of God and expressing himself. And then the word power falls away, for in all the universe there is only God expressing himself as individual being. The word power proves itself to be a matter of relativity, for where there is no power, there must be something. For where there is power, there must be something to be a power over or against, denoting another power, perhaps lesser, but nevertheless a power. Omnipotence means all power. But in metaphysics, the word omnipotence is often diluted to indicate a great power over other powers. If we truly understood the word omnipotence as relating to God, we would understand that all power is actually none power, for there is nothing else. In this awareness of the allness of God power, thought is startled to discover that God cannot heal. God is not aware that there is anything that needs healing. God is the essence, the withinness of all being, and the form and the withoutness of all being. And we are embraced in the allness of God being. In the Infinite Way teachings is revealed the tremendous secret that God power is really non-power. If in all the universe there is only one presence, one being, one source, is there any other power? This sentence in the July 1961 letter sums it up concisely. Nothing can ever be power in the presence of God. And so the student of the Infinite Way is not fooled by outward appearances, whether of good or of evil, but knows that the source of all creation, but knows that the infinite invisible is the substance, the essence, the law, the activity, the source of all creation. Nothing is left out. When in meditation we seek an understanding of the nature of God, we realize that God is now what God has ever been. We do not entreat God to be God. Nothing can change the allness and ever-presence of God. Is there less of God when we are faced with manifestations of war, disease, or death? In the silence we hear the words, "Be not afraid, it is I." In quietness and in confidence, we stand steadfast in the assurance that I will never leave thee, I have never left thee. Oh, it's nice to have good students, isn't it?
Thank you.